Hey, crazy, and welcome to the stage, Kate.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. I've been talking to Steve about coming to Agile on the Beach for about 5 years now, so I'm very, very happy to finally make it. And just a little bit more about me, a little context to me outside of the work. Well, this is a very American accent. I lived in the UK for 16 years, believe it or not. Nothing stuck. I now live in far-flung rural France, where nothing's sticking there either. So happy to be with you. A question already? Happy to be with you and kind of bring with you my focus and my experience so far with emotional intelligence in product management. And it's really interesting because the work I do as an executive coach, I work with product leaders and executives of organizations, all shapes and sizes all over the world. I really am lucky and I really like what I do. But it gives me the chance to work with people who are going through things like what Jeff was talking about this morning. You know, that anxiety when you're going through a transformation, and you know, the idea of your power and the power that you hold may not be what it used to be. That's kind of a common place where I work with people. Actually, I'm kind of starting to think like Jeff and I should form a partnership, and maybe I should just follow him in and coach the clients that he's working with as well. But that's a prime example of the folks that I work with and the work that we do. And for those of you that haven't had coaching before, I can tell you one of the first questions your coach is going to ask you is, what brings you to coaching? You know, what do you want to work on? And you can imagine the remarks and the replies that I get to that question. It's quite diverse, and it's a bit all over the place. But I noticed very early on that when I asked product people that question and product design people that question, the response had kind of this common theme or kind of common element and consistency to it. They didn't want to just be good at whatever they'd come to work on. They wanted to be super successful at it. Super successful people build super successful products, right? That's the theory. So when I'd follow up and ask questions around, well, what does that success really mean? What does it look like? How are you going to know when you get there? I'd often get these blank stares back, which is fair enough. So to help my clients think through this idea of personal success, and to help me kind of structure an engagement around it, I went and did a massive amount of research into the concept overall. Let's see if this works. There we go. And I started, as many of us do, and went to our friend Google and typed in a really big, broad search question, and that was, what is success? Not just within product management, but success overall. And as you can imagine, I got a lot of results back from that too. Aha. This result actually captured my attention. It said success equals 85% soft skills and 15% hard skills. And it captured my attention for a few reasons. One was that it kind of aligns with my view on the work that I do with people. We're often more focused on the human side of things and the human challenges versus the functional or technical challenges that they're facing. So I liked that. But it also captured my attention because it seemed like it was so perfectly packaged, right? Like in the olden days when we had bumper stickers on cars, like this would have been a bumper sticker on my car probably, back in my nerdy older days. But I wanted to know more. I wanted to know if this was real data or fake news. And if it was real, where did it come from? What were the questions asked? Was it statistically significant? So I went down a massive rabbit hole online and found out that the data was real. It was extrapolated from a report done by this man, Charles Riborgman, who in 1918 was a physicist at the University of Chicago. And he was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation and various engineering societies at the time to help them understand if the education on offer to young engineering students was actually helping to prepare them for successful careers in engineering. So Charles said, sure, I'm going to take that on, and he embarked upon a multi-year research study. One of the things that he did was he sent out surveys to 30,000 engineers across the country. Like, my mind boggles at the logistics involved with this because, like, I have visions of Pony Express and people with, like, mile-high piles of surveys coming back, but he did it. And one of the questions on the survey was asking them to prioritize the criteria for success in engineering. And he gave them 6 terms to prioritize. One was technique, which is what they were learning in school, efficiency, character, judgment, knowledge, and understanding of men. And understanding of men, not quite what I expected it to be. In Charles's day, that was considered kind of the precursor to modern day management practices, okay? What can I tell you a little bit more about some of these words? Because he had slightly different definitions behind some of them. Character in Charles's mind was the mental and moral qualities of an individual. So like honesty, reliability, adaptability, that was how he thought of character. So Charles did get a statistically significant response to his questionnaire, I'm happy to say. And overwhelmingly, the response said that character, that mental and moral quality of individuals, so honesty, reliability, adaptability, things of that nature, was actually the #1 criteria for success in engineering. And judgment kind of came in middle level. Technique, what they were learning at school, came in dead last. So Charles validated this finding again and again and again during his research. And in his final report, which, believe it or not, you can still find online if you want to really nerd out like I did, in his final report, he said, no, your curriculum is not preparing these young men, and it was young men at the time studying engineering, you're not preparing them properly for successful careers in engineering because you're focused too much on technique. You need to make space in your curriculum to allow them to get to know themselves, to build their character, to have personal development, to understand their beliefs, their morals, their values, because that is really the X factor that was going to make the difference and help them to actually become successful in engineering. So, flash forward over 100 years now since Charles's report was published, and here we are in semi-sunny Cornwall on a summer's day. And I tried really hard to find out what was the impact of Charles's research on engineering education at the time. And to be honest, I couldn't find out a lot. I kind of found mentions of it being warmly received. It was kind of critically acclaimed. But there wasn't a direct impact. And the mentions I did find said that his report kind of got lost in the chaos of the times. It was the end of World War I, lots going on. However, there's no doubt his research and his thinking and his data that focused on personal development as kind of this X factor in attaining success, be it personally or professionally, has stayed with us. I mean, I'm still quoting the data from Google today. What has changed, though, over the last century is the body of research and the science and the data behind it, and the words that we use, the vocabulary that we use to describe this. So I want to kind of take you through a little timeline of what I mean and give you some examples. So in 1920, the concept of social intelligence was kind of introduced, and it was kind of the X factor at the time in achieving success. And social intelligence was defined as the ability to read somebody like a book. A few decades later, we started hearing about soft skills. Soft skills, I mean, definitely still with us. I've also used that term today. But it originated in a US Army training manual, believe it or not. And within that training manual, they said, if you want to be a successful officer in the US military, you need to have these things called hard skills that you're going to use when you're working with ammunition and machinery. And you're going to need these vague things called soft skills that you're going to use when you work with people and paper. I don't understand the paper component, but that's what it was. And yes, soft skills still with us today. But a couple of decades later, again, we started hearing about a concept of emotional intelligence. And it became really popular thanks to a book that was published in 1995, and it was written by a guy named Daniel Goleman. And Daniel Goleman was, and he still is, a psychologist from Harvard. He was a journalist at the time with the New York Times, focused on science. And he wrote this groundbreaking book that argued that your EQ, which is your emotional quotient, kind of the measurement of your emotional intelligence, is more important than your IQ in achieving success, whatever kind of success you're looking for. And that concept of the importance and focus on emotional intelligence and what we do has really it stayed with us. So much so that in 2020, the World Economic Forum in their Future of Jobs report came out and said that the #1 thing that they found employers are interviewing for and hiring for is emotional intelligence. And given the last few years we've had since that report came out, I've no doubt that they've really doubled down on that point. And the importance of emotional intelligence in the work that we do has really grown and built. So seeing that I am going to be talking about emotional intelligence a lot in the next half hour or so, I want to make sure we're all on the same page with a definition. So this definition comes from the Institute of Health and Human Potential, which I think sounds like a nice place. And they say that emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions, and recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. And Daniel Goleman, the guy who wrote that book that came out in 1995, has done a significant amount of research since that publication, and has gone on to kind of evolve his own definition of emotional intelligence, and said that it has 4 competencies, actually: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And within those competencies are skills that I bet you guys have all heard of in one way or another. So emotional self-awareness, emotional self-control, achievement orientation, empathy, organizational awareness, the ability to influence others, the ability to coach and mentor, to be an inspirational leader, to deal with conflict when it comes up. All of these are skills of emotional intelligence. And the research does show that on an individual, team, and organizational level, those with higher levels of emotional intelligence tend to outperform those with lower levels of emotional intelligence. They tend to be more successful. So for example, individuals with higher levels of emotional intelligence tend to make more money annually than individuals in similar roles with lower levels of EQ. At the time of this study, which was a few years ago now, it was $29,000 a year more. So again, given the last few years we've had, I have a feeling that number has probably increased a bit. Teams with high levels of self-awareness, and teams can have self-awareness, and it can be measured, believe it or not, but teams with high levels of self-awareness tend to make better decisions, they coordinate their work better, and they deal with conflict better. They're higher performing. They're more successful at what they're doing. Organizations with high levels of empathy tend to outperform financially. They have a higher rate of return than organizations with lower levels of empathy. So overall, like, lots of good stuff comes from focusing on and building your emotional intelligence. But the thing is, so when I look at our product community, as wonderful as it is, I find that we're focused more on what Charles would probably call our technique, right? We are focused on our roadmaps. We are focused on testing in different ways: A/B testing, multivariate testing, building MVPs, OKRs. You know, we're definitely focused on OKRs and like to talk about them. And that's all good, right? Because that is the foundation of what we do. That's really what brings us together. So great. I'm happy we have those conversations. However, the problem is when we over-focus, when we spend so much time on our technique, on our functional skills and what we do, that means we're not leaving space for conversation about how we do the work. And that's where emotional intelligence really comes to play. When you think about it, though, the two are already intertwined, right? So if you're going to build a roadmap, it's not just about what format you're going to use. Is it now, next, and later? Is it outcome-based? It's not just about the software you're going to use. It's about having the emotional intelligence to really move that along and make it happen. It's about having the self-awareness to be able to raise your hand and say, OK, maybe the thing that I am pressing for here in this roadmap is out of my own best interest and not the best interest of my team or the organization. It's about having those influencing skills to bring the challenging stakeholders along with you, to bring those teammates along with you that might be hesitant. It's about having the conflict management skills to actually be able to get it done, because we all know there's going to be some tension and conflict when it comes to putting together a roadmap. It's also about how we hire. It's very influential. I don't know if we really think about it this way enough. That's why I wrote a book about it. So I wrote a book called Hiring Product Managers, and it takes a look at the impact of our own emotional intelligence. That's all right. Come on in. Our own emotional intelligence and the candidate's emotional intelligence and how that impacts the way we think of hiring. Because everything from the job description that we write to the questions that we ask in an interview to the way we consider the candidate's performance after the interview is related to emotional intelligence. There's actually a lot going on there. So my big call to arms today, if you do leave this talk with just one thing, I do hope it's this, is that we need to reframe our narrative, I think, as a community about what is success in product management, and realize that it's not just that focus on mastering what we do and our technique, but it's also, and maybe even more so, a focus on how we do the work. And that is definitely where emotional intelligence comes in. So the cool thing is that you can develop your emotional intelligence, right? It's something you can grow. It's somewhat different than IQ. A lot of research says that the IQ you have when you're born kind of stays with you throughout life, unless there's a tragic incident of some sort. Your EQ, though, is something that you can invest in, you can commit to, and you can focus on developing if you want to. It does take a lot of work, and it does take a commitment. I'm going to talk about 2 different areas of emotional intelligence and talk to you about how you can apply some of our product thinking, some of the focus on experimentation and continuous learning in building your emotional intelligence. So we're going to focus on self-awareness and conflict management today. So I picked self-awareness because it's kind of like the meta skill of emotional intelligence, right? It's like the foundational skill. If you start to focus on building self-awareness, you'll learn a lot of things, of course, about yourself, but you'll learn how to take that into different skills, into things like conflict management and empathy. It's going to be easier to make that connection to other areas that you'd want to explore. Conflict management I picked because we don't like to talk about it because it's not nice and it's not easy and sometimes it's very messy, but it's always there. It's not going away. So I figured it might be a nice thing to just kind of try to get a bit more comfortable and confident with. So we're going to start with self-awareness because I said it is very much kind of a foundational skill within emotional intelligence. And I want to go back to kind of the definition level again and make sure we're all on the same page with what self-awareness is. The definition that I use comes from a book called Insight from Tasha Eurich, who's an organizational psychologist and a researcher. And she said that self-awareness actually has 2 components to it. There's internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. And internal self-awareness is the ability to see ourselves clearly. I think that's kind of the self-awareness we kind of relate most to, right? Then there's external self-awareness, though, which is having the ability to understand how others see us and how we fit into the world around us. And what Eurich talks about is that it's really important to have these 2 in balance. You don't want to skew one over the other, right? Because when you have them in balance, it's going to show up in your approach to how you work, to your relationships. It shows up in ways that we probably never even imagined. And starting to do that, how we start to do that, I could tell you from a really high level, is taking a look really seriously, really deeply at how we're thinking, how we're feeling, what our passions are, what our emotions are, and what our actions and behaviors are. I kind of revert back to like the 3 H's. It's head, heart, and hands that we take a look at. And when you do have these in balance, you'll notice that, and work, you'll start to come in different ways. It'll start to develop and show itself in different ways. It'll show up in how you make decisions because you're going to feel more confident about those decisions. You're going to know what the motivations are behind them, why you're leaning one way or another. It shows up in your overall approach to work because you're going to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you're going to know how to work really well with both of them. It shows up in how you lead because you do lead with your convictions because, again, you know what they're grounded on. You'll know what the beliefs and values and morals are that are behind it. But you also have like this super skill of knowing that you don't know it all, right? And with that means you can lead with conviction, but also show curiosity and humility in your approach to working with others and bringing people along with you. It also shows up in our ability to take responsibility for when things don't work well and learn from that. It's a new style of learning that comes to you as you grow your familiarity. There we go. Thank you very much. It's a tricky word. With head, heart, hands. So I'm going to talk about 3 different ways, or 3 ways that you can build your self-awareness. And these are really simple, pragmatic things that you can do on your own or with a peer coach, with a friend, with a partner, with an external coach, with your manager, if you have that kind of relationship. They're meant to be very simplistic, so you can actually give them a try. I call these the self-awareness trilogy. Know thyself, accept thyself, and improve thyself. We're going to start with know thyself, which really tracks back to that concept of internal self-awareness that Eurich was talking about. And the best way to get going on building a practice of self-awareness through knowing yourself is doing self-reflection. When I was doing research for my book, I found this great survey that said that a daily habit or a daily practice of self-reflection can boost your performance at work by 23%. And the cool thing is they weren't referring to like massive amounts of time spent on reflection and journaling every day. They're talking about an investment of 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. That's all you need to do. And all you do is you grab your pen and paper, and I really would encourage you to actually do this with physical pen and paper because our heads work in a very different way when we have that connection. And sit down and respond to some really simple questions. Things like, what do you want to accomplish today? What are you worried about today? What are you looking forward to today? Do that on your way to work if you're commuting to work. Do that before you open your laptop at home if you're working from home. Simple as. Then check in again at the end of the day. What went well today? What didn't go well today? What are you most grateful for? Bring gratitude into the conversation. That's hugely empowering. And you'll notice with all of these, and this very simple practice of self-reflection, all of these questions start with a what. There's not a why in sight. Why? Well, if we knew why we did something or didn't do something, we probably wouldn't have done it that way in the first place, right? So our brains are actually just not in a place where we can subjectively respond to that question, especially shortly after whatever happened, right? It can send us, asking ourselves why, can send us down some pretty dark thought tunnels and spirals, right? So don't ask why, ask what. What is future focused, what is open, okay? And one more tip on self-reflection as you build this practice. If I can make my computer work. There we go. Well, I'll just tell you. The other, one last thing to kind of keep in mind is you don't, again, want to go too deep. You don't want to get too lost in the details. We're talking about 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, not more than that. If you do get too lost in details, you know, not only do you sometimes start to come across as a bit self-obsessed, but we do start to go to places, oh.
There you go, I just changed it for you.
Oh, okay, could we change it back? There we go.
Okay, cool.
You start to go to places that aren't healthy and that are hard to get out of, because the whole point of doing this self-reflection is start to identify some high-level patterns, behaviors, actions, emotions, feelings that you want to work on, that maybe you want to create some change with. So capture those high-level patterns, and we're going to put them to work in just a minute, okay? So number 2, accept thyself. So we've done know thyself through self-reflection, a short daily habit in the morning and the evening, moving on to accept thyself. Accept thyself really has a lot to do with accepting our blind spots. I say identify and accepting, but I think a lot of times getting the feedback to help us understand what those blind spots might be is not the hard part. A lot of the clients that I work with seem to have 360 reviews on a regular basis. You can set up a nice, easy feedback loop with your manager, ideally, so that you're getting feedback on a regular basis. However, the thing is we often don't accept that information, that feedback as true. So there's another great book that I'd recommend by another executive coach named Marshall Goldsmith, and the book's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which I think is a really good title. But Goldsmith says that it's pretty much human nature. If the feedback that we're receiving doesn't align with our worldview, then we're just going to disregard it. You know, and I see this all the time, and I do it myself too. You know, you get a piece of feedback from someone, and you're like, oh, well, he doesn't really know me, or she didn't have the context, or they weren't there, so it's not really accurate. We just tend to set it aside. So this part of the trilogy of self-awareness and accepting thyself is finding ways to accept the feedback that you're getting as true, as real, and integrate it. And I'm going to introduce you to one really easy practice that you can try out to start to do this. And it's called trusted critic. And it is super simple. All you do is you identify a couple of people, maybe 3 or 4 people, that you know, that you trust, that you respect, excuse me, and you believe has your best interest at heart. Quick drink of water. You believe has your best interest at heart. So this is probably, You got to be careful, though, because you want people that are going to tell you the truth, right? That are going to be direct. So sometimes I think I should call this practice tough love and not trusted critic. So this is probably not your mom, it's probably not your partner, or maybe it is, but you want people that are going to be kind of upfront with you and not beat around the bush. No bullshitters in the conversation. And all you're going to ask them to do is to write down what they think are your strengths and weaknesses, right? And you're going to do the same. You're going to write down your own, what you feel are your strengths and weaknesses. And you're going to come together and you're going to compare lists. And there should be a gap between the two, right? If there's not a gap, then there's something really spooky going on. But the bigger the gap, the more work you have to do on your external self-awareness, right? Getting to know what others are thinking of you and your place in the world, and the place in the community. So this is a good opportunity to identify some high-level patterns, some behaviors that maybe you weren't aware of, to accept them as true because they're coming from people you respect, and that you feel really have your best interests at heart. And you're, again, going to take those with you, and we're going to put them to work. And we're going to put them to work in the third aspect of the trilogy, which is improve thyself. And this is where we're going to do what product people do really well. At least I hope so. And that's build and experiment. So we're going to take those high-level learnings from self-reflection, from trusted critic, and whatever other work you're doing as part of the trilogy. And you're going to start an experiment cycle that I call learn, act, and adapt. It's not too dissimilar from build, measure, learn, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, right? So you take the high-level learning, you identify a behavior, an action, an emotion, whatever it might be that you want to work on, that you want to create some change with. You identify one small thing you can do differently, and identify an amount of time you're going to do it for. Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it an hour? Whatever it is. And you're going to put it into action. You're going to check in on yourself and see how have things gone. How might you continue to adapt to keep that learning going? You're creating a self-awareness learning loop. Isn't that nice? And that can become part of a much broader, much bigger continuous personal development process, right? So very similar to the things that we do on a regular basis. And the thing is, with this, though, I think this is the hardest part of the trilogy, the improve thyself, because this is where the rubber hits the road, right? And this is where I often think it's best to have somebody to work with you on it. And again, that could be a peer coach, it could be a friend, it could be a partner, it could be a manager, it could be an external coach. But this is where you really have to be disciplined. You know, we're asking a lot of you. I'm asking a lot of you. I'm asking you to not only identify something that you'd like to change about yourself that you've learned, but I'm asking you to figure out a way to do that and to check in and to keep it going. There's a lot of different aspects of work here. So I really do encourage you, if you're going to try this or when you try this at home, to get some help and support as you go along. And the thing is, well, I've used this as a self-awareness learning loop, an example. This can be applied to any aspect of emotional intelligence, any skill that you would like to work on. And I'm going to show you how it can work with conflict management in just a second. But before we move on, I'm just going to try to wrap up self-awareness in one slide. And just remind you that it is really the meta skill, right, of emotional intelligence. It's a great place to start if you'd really like to focus on building your emotional intelligence and raising that EQ level. And as you're doing it, remember there's internal and external self-awareness, and great simplistic practices that you can try it on your own can come through when you know thyself through self-reflection, accept thyself through trusted critic, and improve thyself through your learning loops and continuous personal discovery and development. So I'm going to do a not-so-elegant segue into conflict management and build off of that. Because what you'll see is that a lot of the things that we've talked about in self-awareness are going to be applied into conflict management. And just really quick, again, the reason I picked conflict management to focus on is because it's ever-present in what we do. I remember the very first cross-functional team I worked on was probably in 2000 or 2001. And it was when I was working at Yahoo in Sunnyvale. It was also the very first time that we supposedly worked Agile. And we were told by our bosses and our coaches to expect there to be some conflict and some tension because, well, we all had kind of this common goal in where we wanted to get to. It wasn't quite clear how we were going to get there. And we're each going to have kind of our own approach to our own objectives, right? Engineers might be more focused on the technical feasibility. The designers and UX folks on the teams were more focused on the customer experience and making sure it was usable. Me and product and my marketing colleagues, we were much more focused on the business outcome and business objectives. So there was tension and there was conflict. And in some ways, that was good. Conflict is not all bad. There are positives to it, right? You can feel heard. You can feel empowered. You can learn new things about yourselves and others. You might have the opportunity to learn new things about an entire new space you don't have familiarity on. And that can help you as a team create something fantastic. However, what often happens is that we don't get through it enough to get to that positive outcome. Instead, we get stuck. Right? We get stuck in like this cesspool of toxicity of conflict and all of this awful stuff. And that's pretty normal. Actually, I had another slide that seems to have gone bye-bye, but it talks about how challenging conflict is, not just in the situation I talked about, but in organizations overall. There is some research done by the University of Chester, and it showed that of the organizations they surveyed, managers said that they spent 40 to 90% of their time dealing with conflict. 40 to 90% of their time. Like, that's half to almost all of their day is spent trying to figure out tension and conflict and move teams along. And obviously, they weren't doing a great job with it because the organizations that they also surveyed said that when people were leaving, 50% of the time they said they were leaving because of unresolved conflict, okay? So we spent a lot of time working on it. We're not doing a great job at it. And the outcome of all of that is we have to spend a lot of money and time and emotion trying to bring in somebody new. That might just be falling back into kind of this conflict loop. So to break that, Daniel Goleman has proposed the conflict management competency. And he says that in order to be skilled and skilled with conflict management, you need to be able to do three things. You need to be able to help somebody through an emotional or tense time. You need to be able to bring that conflict out into the open, so not let it like dwell in the cesspool of toxicity, right? You need to bring it up and out. And you need to be able to design a solution that everybody can sign up to and endorse. Sounds super easy, right? Like it's not at all. So when I'm working with clients who are going through times of conflict and tension, we start with their response, right? Because my theory is if you can get comfortable and confident in conflict, you're gonna be able to really help people do exactly what Goleman was talking about. You know, to help them through the tense times, to help bring it out into the open, and help design a way forward. But you got to start with you. And this is where we tie back quite a bit to self-awareness, and what I talked about was self-awareness. And starting by taking a look at your head, heart, and hands. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you doing? And what are you capable of doing? So when we do that in our coaching conversations, we take a look at a couple of different things. We take a look at your physical response to conflict. We take a look at your emotional and your thought process when it comes to the moments of conflict. And we take a look at your behaviors. And that's what we're going to go through quickly today. So we're going to start with physical response. So as you guys know, I'm sure you've probably all heard of this crazy fight or flight response, right? It is part of us. It's part of our brain. It's in our limbic system. It's in the amygdala. It's born with us. It comes all the way from the cave women and cavemen times when they had this instinct within them to respond to big, scary animals that could tear them from limb to limb, right? And that response was palms getting sweaty, tummy feeling funny, heart beating super fast, breath short, rapid. Like all of these things were kind of just instinctive within our response to help us realize that we got to get out of there, right? Thing is we haven't really evolved. Our limbic system hasn't evolved through the centuries and centuries and centuries. We still have that response to conflict. However, the conflict we face today is maybe like your manager saying something to piss you off on a Zoom call, right? But we have this same response. So in working with clients, what we talk about in times of conflict is the first thing you got to do is go someplace safe, right? That's what our bodies want us to do instinctively anyway. And that could be, if you're at work, going to a different conference room, going outside, going to get a coffee, although maybe added caffeine at that point is not good. Or do what I used to do, which is go to the ladies' restroom and go to the last stall and lock the door. You know, whatever you got to do, that's what you need to do to get to a safe place. If you're working from home, that might be closing your computer and stepping outside. Whatever works for you. Once you're in this safe place, we need to get your breath back to a more normal place, a more normal pattern. Because the more normal pace that you have in breathing, the clearer your mind is going to be. Your cognitive function increases as your breath, as your breathing rate slows down. Okay, so you get to a more normal place, more normal state that you can start to think clearly. So what I'm going to do, we're going to have some audience participation, which I know you guys are all excited about. And we're going to practice a breathing technique that you can use the next time that you're in midst of tension and conflict and your limbic system's just going haywire. Maybe next week when you're back at work, might be this afternoon if your lunch order goes wrong. But you can try this out. So if you'd like to, if you're interested, all you do is sit up straight, move to the edge of your seat, right? Feet firmly planted and grounded. And we're going to practice something called box breathing or square breathing. And it is so simple. I'm going to explain it first, and then we'll do it together. Okay? So all you do is you breathe in for 4 counts. And I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you hold that for 4. And then you exhale for 4. And you hold it for 4. Okay? Simple? Okay, let's try it. Okay, breathe in for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. How's that feel? Everybody ready for a nap? The idea here is you repeat that as often as you need to until you start to feel that your breathing rate is coming back down to kind of a normal state, a more normal state. Okay? So you can try that next time that something happens that just rubs you the wrong way. Simple breathing technique. Most likely, if you've really just been kind of up in arms, though, you're still going to have some adrenaline running through your body, right? So this is where we actually have an opportunity to learn some different movements that you can try out, be it if you're in the women's bathroom with a locked door, or if you're standing right outside, if you're back home. Just some really simple things to identify where the tension still is in your body and let it go. Okay, so I'm going to ask whoever would like to participate in this and try it out. You can rise from your seats. Anyone? Come on. Move to the aisle if you need to. We're going to do a few things. Okay, so this is super simple. So I'm going to do it first. I'll show you, and you can make fun of me and make faces, and then we'll do it together, okay? So all you do is you're going to bend forward at the waist. You're going to let it all hang. Is my volume okay? We'll see how this goes. Let it all hang out. Let your head hang, your neck hang, your arms and shoulders. And you're going to take a deep breath in and hold it, and then let it out. And then shake it all out. Okay? And you do that as many times as you need to. So the thing with that is, like, not only are you releasing tension that you're probably naturally feeling in your shoulders and your neck. Oh, stay up. We got more, guys. But you're also, again, that also helps with your breathing if you still have like a really rapid pace of breathing going on. So one other thing that we'll try out while you're standing, golf swing. Simple as. I'm not a golfer, but I do this because it does help. So you take your hands, clap them together. Let's say put them over your left or right shoulder, whatever works for you. And you swing through, right? And you keep going and create a little momentum. You get the adrenaline out. You get the tension out. Yeah, hopefully you're not hitting people and creating more tension. And you do that as many times as you need to just start to just kind of loosen up a bit. And get the breathing back down to a normal pace. Start to let your brain do some clear thinking again. Okay, you can sit down now. There thank you very much for doing that, guys. One other thing that you can try if you're at your desk and you can't move, and that is, again, simply sitting at the edge of your seats, focusing on your shoulders, lifting your shoulders to the count of 8, and then put your head back. You're going to really kind of tighten up, take a deep breath in, and let it all go. And that is a really good, nice, easy practice if you are at an office, if you can't get away, if the women's loo is too far to make the run, or the men's, of course. Whatever works for you. Anyway, so the purpose of sharing those with you guys, again, is to try to understand our physical reaction to conflict, because that's the first thing we're going to have to address when something happens that makes us angry, that creates anxiety, that creates tension. The next thing we're going to talk about is thinking and feeling. So if hopefully, right, through your breath work, through your body movements, you are getting to a place where your mind is less cloudy, less fuzzy, and you can have some good, and you can actually have a conversation about what happened, or you can take up that self-reflection practice that we talked about before and do some writing. And what I recommend is we try to, at this point, separate our thoughts from our emotions, right? Really hard to do, but that's why we're going to try it. So the first thing you're going to do is just capture what happened. Right? It's the story. Tell me the story. Write down the story. Who is involved? What happened? What's at stake? What's the history? What was your reaction? What was the other person's reaction? Just write it all down. Okay? And then we're going to layer on top of that emotions. I know it's really hard to think about these in two separate forms, but it can help you kind of start to think more clearly again about what has happened and how you want to respond. And when it comes to emotions, think about what's driving you. Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it judgment? Is it love? Perhaps it's their love underneath all of this that's driving the tension. Who knows? I've had some crazy conversations in coaching at times. But ask yourself, what are your emotions? What's driving you? What do you think's driving the other person? How might this be creating progress? How might this be blocking you and moving forward? And trying to find that way forward. So again, from this practice of self-reflection, take a look at the high-level patterns, okay? And we're going to put everything to work again in an experiment in just a minute. One last thing to focus on, though, is your behavior, right? How are you behaving? How is the other person behaving? How is that impacting and maybe helping or blocking any progress? So a tool that I often use in coaching is called the Cartman drama triangle. So the drama triangle basically says or assumes that we take on one of 3 roles in times of drama and conflict. We could be the victim, which is poor me, poor me, poor me. We could be the rescuer, which is I will come in and save the day, and victim, I'm going to sort everything out for you. Or you could be the prosecutor, which is basically victim and protector. You guys are crazy. You got this all wrong. This role often is also described as the villain. Like, could be a bit manipulative, could be a bit backstabbing, but no matter what, they're not going to help matters, right? So in thinking about conflict, tension, or really any other situation you might find yourself in at work, what role are you holding? Are you a victim? Are you a persecutor? Are you a prosecutor? How can you make change there? So how can you move? I'm going to get a new clicker. How can you move? I'll just talk to you about it. How can you move from being one of those 3 roles to something more empowering? How could you move from being victim to being a problem solver? How can you move from being the protector who solves everything to being a coach to help somebody figure it out for themselves? How can you move from being a persecutor to somebody that's going to take a more positive, empowered approach to working, to helping people figure out what they can do and what their opportunities are? So this, again, is fodder for building the experiments. And that's really what we're going to do next, right? You're going to take what you're noticing from your physical reaction, from your mental and emotional reaction, and from your behavioral reaction, and you're going to build experiments off of that, okay? So it is the same framework: learn, act, and adapt. And as I mentioned before, it can be used with self-awareness, it can be used with conflict management, it can be used in any kind of behavioral change that you really want to focus on. And you can structure that within emotional intelligence and the different skill sets that have been defined. I am going to try to wrap this up and put down my clicker, thankfully. So trying to wrap up the conversation overall, I want to go back and say that Charles was right. You know, the guy who said over 100 years ago that we need to focus more on personal development and character development and not as much on our technique had it right. And we still haven't learned the lessons that he was trying to teach us. We do have opportunities to create this change and focus on not just what we do, but how we do the work. And using a structure like emotional intelligence and knowing the competencies and the skills within it is a great place to start. And start with your self-awareness. Start by thinking about internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. Get some additional help and support through your peers, your mentors, your bosses, your partners, your coaches, whoever might be. But do take the time to really focus on it. Because I think the one thing that I've noticed at the end of every engagement that I have with my clients is that when they feel good and empowered by the change that they've had, it's not because I've given them a new tool or framework for building an amazing roadmap or for even doing OKRs for that matter. It's always come from the work that they've done within. And if there's anything I can do to help, you can find me here the next couple of days, or please keep in touch, because I'd love to talk about it more. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Kate. That was absolutely amazing. So another round of applause for Kate. That was brilliant. It made us all feel absolutely relaxed. So we have time for a couple of questions, if you're happy. Yeah, so any questions from the audience? Yep.
Yeah, just a quick one. We're talking about conflict and emotion. Sorry. Just a quick one, talking about conflict and emotional intelligence with others. If we just use as an example, you're engaging with somebody who you're having a degree of conflict with, and potentially you're going through this process of understanding yourself and understanding how you can improve yourself, and you are also able to recognize how somebody else is reacting and behaving. So again, looking at the drama triangle, you can say, well, this person's being a victim, or potentially even to the extent of operating in bad faith, potentially, with this conflict. I just want to get some thoughts from you of how best you think you would approach a situation like that. Is it entirely still just reflecting self-reflection continually, or is there an element of trying to coach somebody else through the same process as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the epitome of building that conflict management competency, is being able to help others through it as well, right? Being able to help others through emotional intense times, figure out a way to bring that out into the public and into the open, and actually help them figure out a way through it. So the self-reflection really comes in, I think, when it's you understanding your response, right, and how you handle conflict. Because, again, my theory is that if you get a better understanding of how you handle it, then you're probably going to be able to help others a bit easier, right, because you're going to feel more confident about it. So I think of it, you know, there's obviously a lot of details in the situation that you're talking about that we can talk more about later, but I would say that there's always opportunity to be of aid, but to think about that role that you are stepping into, and make sure that it's coming from like a place of empowerment and not a place of creating dependency is something really to keep in mind, that you're not kind of becoming part of something that is going to be really difficult to come out of, I guess. So a lot of the managers that I work with do take on that role of protector, right? It's just natural. I want to make everything okay for everybody who's working for me, and I want to make them super happy. And through doing the work, you find that that's not really your job, right? And that's not a good place for you and a sustainable place for you to be emotionally, psychologically, anything like that. So there is great opportunity and positivity that can come through helping somebody else through conflict. But just check in with yourself. You know, what are your intentions behind it? What are your motivations? And what would be the way that you could maybe coach somebody versus do it for them. And make sure you have that balance. Hopefully that helps. Okay.
That's great. One more question. Any other questions? Oh. That was easy.
Hi, that was great, thank you. I can probably read about this in your book, but I look after a lot of the hiring processes for UX people in my organisation, and it's largely focused on technical skill.
Right.
Are there objective ways we can measure emotional intelligence as part of the hiring process?
Yeah, you'll have to pick up the book. I got to get a plug in because my publishers, the original publishers are in the room. But yes. So as I talk about in the book, there are so many different ways that you can check in on it. One of the easiest kind of go-tos that I can say really quickly is the questions that you do ask. So I talk a lot about behavior-based questions. And that's moving away from kind of those strict technical questions and sometimes those kind of brain teaser questions that we like to throw out just to kind of throw somebody for a loop, like, you know, how many fire exits do you think are in the building, you know, to understand their thought process, which is really not. It's just to make us feel cool. But it's asking them to tell you a story, right? Asking them to tell me about a time when maybe things didn't go well on a project. What did you do? How did you respond? What would you do differently now? What you're looking for is kind of that storyline that starts with maybe something didn't work out well, admitting something didn't work out well, taking ownership of that, but also showing how they're trying to address that and change and iterate and adapt and grow and how they might do it differently now. Because sometimes what happens when we're asking these behavior-based questions is the candidate will stick with the narrative like, I did this and it just didn't work out. But what you're really looking for is seeing if they can continue to grow and adapt and how they might address the situation very differently now, even a couple years on. So that's just one simple technique. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kate. Another round of applause for Kate.